Hello everybody, welcome back to another Pro Tools 2 video tutorial. This is the last tutorial that I'll record for this unit, for Unit 2. And what I want to focus on for this tutorial is essentially some correction techniques. This is after we've already cut out a lot of the errors, the blips, the hums. We've organized our tracks already. Please take the time to color code your different tracks and just use things like markers and all these organizational tips I talked about in the earlier videos, so that way your workflow is really concrete. When I'm doing any type of audio project, I'm always thinking in stages. So right now we're in the editing stage. These last corrections that I'm making are so that way I'm prepared to move on to the mixing stage and I have really clean audio to work off of. Alright, so I actually use the markers right here. Remember, just hit the little marker button and you can add comments and cues for yourself to mark just an edit point that I wanted to fix. I even left myself a comment, and if you want to open up this panel, just double click right on the marker, and I said this trumpet should be sped up to match the flute. So let's take a little listen to the track, and you can hear that the trumpet track is kind of laying back rhythmically and it's matching a flute part, but the timing of the two is a little different. So let me find that track that I'm talking about. Which one is it? I think it's... Ooh. So that's the trumpet track. Let me play it for you in context, and you can kind of hear how it just hangs back a little bit in comparison to the flute sound that's also happening at the same time. And it works, but if your aesthetic preference is for things to be a little bit more locked in time with each other, one tool that you can use is time compression and expansion. This can help us speed up this track just the slightest bit to match with that flute track a little bit better, right? Actually, sorry, it was trumpet 3, now that I'm remembering. So let's take a listen real quick. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll cut around this point, so Command E, so I inserted my 2 cut points. And what I'll do now is I'll go up to Smart Tools and right click, and I can change from our standard trim option to a different tool. Right click on the first box, TCE, standing for time compression and expansion. Now in this way, when I click on it, it changes the trim tool into this time compression and expansion tool. If I push inward now, it will actually speed up the track. If I pull out, it will slow it down. So let me pull out just to give you an extreme here. All right, and now I'll solo this so you can hear. And I'll play it in context with the rest of the mix, so hopefully you can hear that it's a little bit slower now. Toward the end there is like ba 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 the timing. But I want to go in the other direction. I'm going to hit Command Z to go backward now, and I'm going to push in because my goal is to try and speed this up the tiniest bit to get it to fit with the flute a little bit better. So that's about it, just a little. So let's hear how that sounds now. right? So I sped that up. I could be a little bit more fine-tuned, maybe even now push this back the slightest bit to make sure it really locks in. So let's listen again. Right? So for me, that's a little bit tighter tempo-wise, and he's not, or whoever's playing the trumpet is not laying back as much. Total aesthetic preference, but that's something you can do. If something's just not locking in by the slightest bit, you know, you could even adjust one note, you know, a couple of notes just to get that to fit a little bit better, right? Especially if someone rushed or just kind of dragged on a couple of notes in one whole passage. All right, so that's time compression and expansion. I'm going to right click again in the Smart Tools area and go back to our trim tool. All right, what I will do is, let's see if I can span the, oh, hello. Let's undo that trim. Cool. Yeah, so what I would do is just kind of have these two sections merge so you don't have that space, and be careful here because, you know, you're going to over merge with the old track. So just be mindful, but you know, you can kind of like kill off dead space, trim the track further, and then like we talked about last video, just add in a little fade whenever you make these edit points to smooth things out. Make a better transition in and out. All right, so the next thing to also think about is the volume levels, right? The actual level balance of all these different clips. So since this was a live recorded performance, we have a lot of variety and dynamic range happening here. For instance, let's look at this trumpet 1 track. Take a look at this. Do you see how small these waveforms are in comparison to the waveforms around it, and even in comparison, right, to some of the waveforms on that same track that happened later on? So one thing we can actually do, if we have little sections like this that are drastically different than, you know, over here, we could actually apply clip gain and just affect the volume of this one particular area. So again, I'll do Command E to separate the track. And if you zoom in a little bit and look where it says 0 dB, we can actually turn up the gain of this clip specifically. So this is helpful if you just have one section that's really low or one section that just needs a little adjustment, even if it's a word. This is how we get into that more advanced and precise audio editing. So let's take a listen. So I should play this. I'll play this in isolation first. Right? And that's such a soft sound. Hear what it sounds like before I add the clip gain. Right? So this is really helpful because you don't have to end up raising the volume of everything, and you can still end up getting essentially a nice full healthy signal that compares. So just remember, right on here you can access the clip gain and affect individual parts. Again, you could do something as small as just this little section because a word is off by a little bit. It's tedious editing work, but it makes the world of a difference when you go into this fine of detail. All right, if you right click you can also access a lot of the tools we were just talking about, including the clip gain, right? And then even some other clip effects. You can bypass, essentially mute the clip, etc., etc. All right. Cool. So these are some manual ways of doing this. If you notice, I usually like to show you the manual tools to use first, because there's nothing better than the human touch when you're editing. You don't want to leave your editing up to automated functions all the time. What's ideal is try and edit as many things as you can manually, and then use tools that have a more automated function. All right, so one of those functions that is really useful, especially if your audio is at just such a low level, is called the Normalize function. We can find this up in Audio Suite under Other. And basically what normalizing does is it raises the gain of the entire audio track. All right, and so the gain is essentially referring to our input signals. You know, when we use a volume fader, that's the output of the track that we're lowering. When we're adjusting gain, we're increasing the input volume of what's going into the track. So the one caveat to increasing gain is that you normally also increase the noise included in your environment. All right, so when we do the normalize function, we can take a really soft and low track, something that's very low overall. Like, take a look at this bass trombone track in comparison to all the other files. We could, of course, use clip gain, but if the whole track is problematic or really low, what you can do is highlight the track, go up to Audio Suite, and then hit Normalize. This will bring up the Audio Suite window, which directly applies processing to whatever track or clip you have highlighted. It's different than applying a plugin, because a plugin processes in real time. This essentially renders and directly and somewhat permanently, you can always hit Command-Z to undo it, changes the track. All right, so let's listen to this bass trombone, and you can hear how low it is. So you can hear it's really low. I'll play it in relation to the rest of the tracks too. So you can barely even hear it. So we'll use the normalize function to bring the whole track up to a target level, essentially, right? It's very similar to properly setting the gain on your microphone before you start recording. In this case, we're essentially setting the gain of this track, but just after we're recording. We're kind of fixing a problem. So I'm going to hit render, and what you'll notice are these wave files are going to spike up. It's literally going to get louder. Boom, right? But also notice the background and ambient noise got louder too. So that's the key with normalization. It's keeping your signal to noise ratio the same. So it's bringing up everything evenly, your noise as well as your signal. So let's take a listen now in isolation. So still relatively low, but a lot stronger than where it was before. you know, this first note is pretty low in comparison to some of these spikes later on. So in combination with doing your normalization to get the overall level up, what you can also do is what we did before. Just highlight a particular area, separate that clip using Command E, and then we can use the clip gain to further boost this first note here. So let's solo this and hear how that compares now. Alright, so subtle difference, but it goes a long way in balancing out and evening out all of your tracks. Alright, so after this point, what I would look to do next is add some corrective EQ. Now, I specifically use the term corrective because I want to emphasize that we shouldn't be focusing on enhancing the sounds, making them sound like amazing and finalized and polished. That's what the mixing stage is for. That's what the mastering is for. Right now, I want you to focus on correcting frequency imbalances. If you're noticing a lot of high end in one area or a lot of low end in another area, this is a good place to cut. Cut first, boost later, right? Because right now we're concerned with cleaning up these tracks, and then in the mixing stage we can focus on enhancing, contouring the waveforms to get that better frequency balance. So let's take this bass bone track again, all right? And I think it could use more bass, right? I think there's a frequency imbalance just in that context alone. So let's solo. All right, so let's add, you know, our typical 7-band EQ plugin. All right. Let's see, we'll just solo this and I'll make adjustments as I solo. What I'll do to make life a little bit easier, let's turn loop playback on. All right, so I'm going to highlight this one section and then I'm going to right click the play button here, hit loop, and so now I'll keep hearing this same note repeat over and over again as I'm trying to fix the balance. All right, so I'll solo this. You won't hear me talk, but you can see what I'm doing. All right, so I'm not going to focus on cutting out the bass frequencies, or sorry, boosting the bass frequencies. I'll do that in the mix, right? Because I want to be able to do that in context with thinking about the kick drum, the bass guitars, all of the other things. That to me is more of a mixing decision. But what I did here, right, as I was testing out and doing a frequency sweep, is that there was some ringing that was higher up in the bass trombone track. And I also realized there's a lot of high energy, high frequency energy that I don't need up here. I'm focusing on cutting things out right now and just trying to get a nice clean sound, getting rid of extraneous noises, frequencies, and things. So that's what you just saw me doing here, is I said, oh man, I don't need these frequencies up here. There's nothing hear for me, right? And what this helps with is that it gets rid of audio and frequency data that's not important, all right? So that's what I mean by corrective EQ. Just focus on cutting. Figure out what doesn't sound good, do frequency sweeps. You can add a little bit, a few audio boosts, but ask yourself, am I trying to fix a mixing issue? Or does this particular sound really need this to sound correct, essentially? All right. So the last thing I would do, if I feel confident and comfortable about my editing work, I would try and get all of these tracks to the same length. So what I would do to do that, to make the mixing stage and the editing stage easier, I would highlight all these tracks, see, like this, and then you can go up to the edit window, all right, and we can insert silence. And basically what that does, oh, sorry, my bad, consolidate the clips first, right? Take a moment to render. All right, so consolidating the clips, if you see here, it joins all the edits that you made, and then it also makes all these tracks the same length. This is very useful, so that way when you move on to the next stage of mixing, right, despite wherever you move these tracks, everything's going to be the same. It's going to be clear where the starts and the beginnings, the endings are. And again, this is just a good workflow process. At this point, if I feel confident with my edits, what I do is I save this as a different session. So I'll do save copy in, because that's going to make sure I package everything together. Make sure to hit audio files, and then hit OK. And at this point, I'll name this Fair Chance Edited, ready for mixing, to give myself separation. So now I have two versions of the project. I have one that's edited, right? And so if I need to go back to the editing stage, I can do that. And now I'm moving forward to the mixing stage. Everything's cleaned up, theoretically, and everything's ready to be mixed. All right, so I'd hit save and go from there. It'd be nice if I could spell. All right, cool. Well, that's it for this video. Just apply these skills to your own editing process of this. Fortunately, the audio is relatively clean. We got a pretty good recording, so a lot of the editing can happen on a micro level, and it's about fine-tuning and just getting something really clean and clear. All right, so let me know if you have questions, and I will see you next video.